Hi everyone, welcome back to another painting. Today I'm going to be working on this bee and rose. I hope you enjoy it. So this one started with a fairly simple plan. I knew I didn't want a background, I just wanted the two subjects, the bee and the rose. That way there'd be nothing to distract the eye from them, and I could really focus on what makes them pop. So I omitted the background and I limited myself to a simple 3-color palette. And this was actually the first major painting I've done with a new set of paints from M. Graham, and I'll get on that later. I also chose to omit a sense of direct lighting and just stick to an ambient sense of light. I know there is a cast shadow on the bee, but as far as the rose is concerned, the main large subject matter, there isn't really any one point that the light's coming from. And that was mainly to take a lot of stress off of planning. Like myself, as plenty of other artists, if the planning or preparation of a piece gets too tedious or too burdensome, I'll say burdensome, then I'll either find reasons to cut corners or put off the piece until I have to cut corners. And I really didn't want to do that, so I started off giving myself a lot of leniency with how the piece was going to get done. Now, like I was saying earlier, this is the first painting the first major painting actually that I did with a primary set of M. Graham watercolors, and that set was composed of alizarin crimson, Hansa yellow deep, and I'm gonna butcher this name, but anthraquinone blue. First try. And that's a cool red, a warm blue, and a mid-tone yellow. I know a lot of artists do prefer to have the cool and the warm yellow on the palette, and for a long time I also did. For these paints, I noticed that just a solid mid-tone or a solid mid-range yellow would suffice, especially given that it's a primary in both CMYK and red, yellow, and blue. But one of the things I really liked about the M. Graham paints was that they are extremely vibrant in comparison to the Daniel Smith paints. They were extremely sticky and buttery, and that's because they're made with honey along with gum arabic, whereas Daniel Smith and a lot of watercolor companies use gum arabic, but M. Graham uses considerable amount of honey for the binder. I also noticed that they're quite a bit less granulating or prone to granulation. When I was looking at the catalog, they had quite a bit of non-granulating paints, which is actually what I was looking for. And so I'm excited to continue to test out more and more colors from M. Graham. But I also really like the ethics of the business. And this isn't meant to be a jab at any other company in general. But M. Graham does make a point to be as environmentally friendly as they can, and I respect and appreciate that. Now on the rose, the layers went down smooth and easy. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I had an absolute blast. This painting was a joy. So I started on the rose with just laying down diluted layers of alizarin crimson, and then I would slowly add more crimson and the anthraquinone blue to help accent the shadow tones. The leaves are really simple. I used a combination of the Hansa yellow deep with that same anthraquinone blue to create that green tone, as well as adding more of that anthraquinone blue to accent the shadows. And on the bee, I used a combination of all 3 colors to make that gray tone, and of course the Hansa yellow deep for the stripes on the bee. And as you'll see, I was able to play with the transparency of watercolor, laying down lighter layers of both the yellow and the gray where the wings are. And you'll see this also with the pinks of the alizarin crimson on the rose, being able to lay down just little bits here and there in lighter tones where the wings are, and then coming back around it with heavier tones to give the illusion that there's that sheen that bug wings tend to have. And I was really happy with the way that turned out. And as you might also notice, our little bee friend only has 4 legs. Unfortunately, this was not on purpose. But I'm sure I can come up with some story where our little friend lost his legs and had to come to this rose to rest. So that's really all I have to say about the painting itself. This painting was an absolute blast, and I couldn't be more happy with the way it turned out. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why I love to paint, and specifically why I love to paint with watercolor. I do have a laundry list of notes written out, and they're not really in any order, and I'll do my best to get through them with some sense of flow, but if I can't, I do apologize. So first off, painting and really even all the preliminary work, it's fairly cathartic. It gets me into a groove, gets me into a mood that tames the waters in my mind. I'm sure there's plenty of other artists, or even just plenty of other people out there in my situation, who tend to be scatterbrained and all over the place, and generally just not very good at focusing. But when working on a painting, it requires you to do that. It requires you to take a moment and to invest yourself into the process and the project. And it's really helped me grow, both as an artist and as a person. And like I said, this starts really with the drawing process and the preliminary work and even the ideation of just sitting there and thinking about what's going to go into it. And you go from there right into the setup and preparation and planning your colors and doing value studies, color compositions. All this before the painting even starts. And then you come into the painting in layers, or as I like to work, painting in layers. And the process being as involved as it is has really helped cultivate a sense of work ethic when it comes to art within me. And that's something, not only why I love painting and why I love working on art, it's also, it's given me a sense of appreciation for it too, because it's helped grow me as a professional. Now, all that considered, it is challenging, but it's also engaging. And I think because it's so engaging is why I like the challenge. There's a lot of stuff to know, and you don't have to know it all, and you don't even have to know much to get started. But there is still a lot to know and a lot to learn. And that was part of the reason I fell in love with painting. Part of the reason I fell in love with watercolor specifically. And it started with things like mixing. This is something I'm still working on. Why I tend to start off with a split primary set if I'm going to be exploring a new brand. And I know a lot of artists do the same thing, and actually I do it because I learned from plenty of artists actually here on YouTube. But learning mixes was a great place to start because it meant I could buy just a handful of colors and I could get a wide array of colors just from those. And if you're just starting off, I highly recommend doing your research and putting together a split primary set. And I might do a video on that eventually. But until then, there's plenty of videos here on YouTube that cover that. But aside from mixes, There's things like the various pigment properties and light fastness and opacity and granulation. When I was talking about the painting itself, one of the reasons I gravitated towards mgram is because they have a wider array of colors that don't granulate, and that was something I was looking for. And that doesn't mean that granulation is bad, it just means that I wasn't looking for it. It's not something I quite wanted, and that can change. That could change. Perhaps sometime in the future I decide I do want granulation in my palette, and I'll know where to look. And after that, basic color theory, which is more in depth and more complex than it leads on to, because that involves color psychology and a lot of it goes hand in hand with a lot of other principles of design, but it's still an extremely valuable tool and still a worthwhile investment to learn about. And you also have the various different kinds of papers. Like this painting was done on Arch's cold press paper, but that's not the only thing out there. You also have hot press and rough and other kinds of brands, other types of paper. Like Arch is 100% cotton, but you also have cellulose paper. You have polypropylene, I believe I may be using the wrong word, but pretty much plastic paper. And that can come down to preference and also how well it works with the way you want to use watercolor. Because you also have weights of paper, whether you have 140 pound, 300 pound. That could be dependent on how heavily you apply the water or pigment on the paper. If you're doing minimal and light washes, you can go with a fairly light paperweight. That's okay. But if you're going to be aggressive, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but if you're going to be doing a lot of layers with a lot of water, it's going to be in your best interest to go with a heavier paperweight. And of course you have all of the other design and composition principles, things like unity and rhythm and line, and the list goes on. But still, a lot to learn, but very rewarding and very worthwhile to add to your toolbox. And as I've been saying throughout this video, it's rewarding. You either accomplish something or you learn something, and both of those are great. And one of the things that's kept me going at art is the sense of accomplishment and being able to learn constantly and consistently. I love learning, and I love learning about art and how I can finally put onto paper what's been floating around in my mind. And art has also given me a new sense of perspective, both an appreciation for artists at large, but also a new perspective on the world. Because when I'm going on my walks, I get to look around at nature, or perhaps the houses, or perhaps the people that are out and about, looking at motion and energy and how things are moving through space and how things are occupying space. Because that's one of the first lessons you learn in formal art school, is how to render 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. How to capture the essence of space. And it really does give you a new perspective on the world. And with that perspective, it's given me a new appreciation for the world and for nature. I find myself stopping more often to take pictures of trees or plants or brick walls or cracks in the sidewalk, because I decide, I like the rhythm or the energy of that crack, or that tree is really telling a story, or something I wouldn't quite understand a couple years ago and still don't quite understand. It's all been a feeling. And that's okay because it's fun. And I enjoy it. And enjoying art has helped me enjoy everything else that isn't art. And painting has also given me a sense of pride. When someone who isn't an artist looks at your work, or when you strike up a conversation about art to someone who doesn't do art, that's usually the first thing they say is that, oh, I can't do that. I can barely draw stick figures. And as cliche as that statement may be, artists, pat yourself on the back. You put in the hard work. You worked hard. And you learned a lot. And it shows. Being able to see a timeline of my capabilities, my skills, my inspirations, and my knowledge as an artist in a timeline of paintings and drawings and sketches and doodles is probably the best way I could really depict becoming more. I have all these works I've completed, which are fragments of myself, to some respect. And being able to see all them gives me a clearer avenue to critique myself and improve and grow as an artist and as a person. And I imagine it's somewhat akin to someone keeping a journal and going through and reading it every so often, not only to see where they have improved, but where they have yet to improve. But all these things that I've been talking about in this video really are just facets in the greater sense of just art. It doesn't have to be as specific as anything I spoke about in this video. Art is an experience. Art is an investment. Art is a part of us. Art is a language. Art is us, really. And I'm glad to be part of it. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. No. Anyway, that's about all I have for you today. If you like this painting, you can get a copy of it over on my Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. This is this month's postcard. And on that note, I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons. Your support has been absolutely wonderful, and I'm so very glad to share everything I've been working on with you. The original painting will also be for sale on my shop. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Well, thank you all for sticking around to the end. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening, a wonderful pair of socks, a wonderful pair of shoes on your feet, with a slice of cheese in each. That's all I have to say. Until next time, God bless.